Today, I am going to talk about or discuss about research methods in social psychology. The main objectives of this lesson is to understand the definition and purpose of social psychology, the definition and applications of research methods. What are research methods that we are going to discuss today? One is survey method and observational method, but before we go to that, let's look what is social psychology. The scientific field that seeks to understand the nature and cause the individual behavior and thought in social situations is known as social psychology. Similarly, according to Gordon Allport, social psychology is the use of scientific methods to understand and explain how thoughts and feelings and behavior of individuals are influenced by the actual, imagined or implied the presence of other human beings. It is not just about social influences on an individual, but also the social perception and interaction that happens. A systematic study of social perception and interactions using a set of values and several methods that can be used to get information from evaluation or further analysis. This information or data must be collected. It should be accurate and error-free. It should be objective in nature, that is free of any kind of bias. Data should be easily verifiable. The examiner must be able to accept or reject the views based on the accuracy of the data. Now, social psychological scientific research, it talks about social psychological research methods that allow psychologists to get a better look at what causes people to engage in certain behaviors in social situations. To empirically study social behavior, psychologists rely on several different scientific methods to research social psychology topics. These methods allow researchers to test hypotheses and theories and look for relationships between different variables. As psychology is a science, researchers use scientific methods to understand the nature and concept of learning and behavior. They use various methods to collect and analyze data to reach a concrete conclusion. But behavior is a complex subject to quantify, and with the help of assumptions about nature, the study can be a more regulated and consistent system. Now let's look at the types of research methods. Social psychologists use the data collected to research undertaken to understand the nature of social behavior and social thought, making it scientific. While focusing on individual behavior, causes and thoughts of such behavior in social settings, it studies these changes through various methods, scientific methods. The most fundamental way of dividing research is either into pure or basic research and applied research. A fundamental research is a formal and systematic process where the researchers aim to develop a theory, a model by identifying all the important variables in a situation and by discovering broad generalizations and principles about these variables. It uses a careful sample so that its conclusions can be generalized beyond the immediate situation. Applied research, on the other hand, applies the model theory developed through the fundamental research, but its main purpose is to test the theses. Depending upon the nature of research, it can be classified into experimental and non-experimental research. Experimental research. Here, the independent variable can be manipulated. Laboratory experiments. We have field experiments, non-experimental research where the independent variable cannot be manipulated. Then we have field studies, ex post facto study, survey research, content analysis, case study, ethnographic studies, correlational research, systematic observation. Under these, let's study about one method each. Let's consider the survey method. The word survey is derived from sur and veer, which means over and see respectively. The term survey is used as a method of investigation by direct observation of a phenomenon or getting information through an interview or questionnaire method to collect data. Herman and Morse defines it as a method of analysis in scientific and orderly form for the defined purpose of a given social situation activities. A social survey draws the characteristic features of addressing a burning social issue and moves towards a constructive program of social research. It is designed to study the relation of some aspects of human life. It helps the scientist by forming a basis for further research. It describes the phenomena to a scientist in a descriptive way by providing large amounts of information, which can later help in hypothesis formation. The survey method also explains the determinants along with the description, which can be further divided into demographic features, social conditions, opinions, and attitudes. Now, what are the different types of survey? A general or a specific survey, a regular or ad hoc survey, preliminary and final survey, we have a consensus and sample survey. What is general survey? It concerns collecting general information about population, institution, or phenomena without any specific objective or hypothesis, generally taken up by the government to keep the data updated on many socio-economic problems. For example, a census of population conducted once in a decade. What is specific survey? A specific survey collects information as suggests that is deemed fit for the question that has been chosen. For example, a marketing survey on a particular issue, on people's attitude about the use of television. Regular survey. It is conducted periodically or at regular intervals. It has a permanent machinery to collect information and it has to be set up. Mainly used in the economic survey and also in understanding the credit system used in rural India, conducted annually by the RBI. Ad hoc survey. They are conducted only once and are taken up to address a single issue at a specific time point. Preliminary versus final survey. Preliminary surveys are generally conducted before taking up a wider sample. To further improve the tool based on the received data, it can also be called as a pilot study. The data collected from the final improvised tool can be called as the final survey. Census versus a sample survey. A census survey collects data from all the members of population for several issues. A sample survey collects data from a few samples of the population, which can be either general or specific. A sample survey saves time and money in comparison to the census survey if and only if the samples truly represent the population. Now, the methods of study. In selecting a particular method for a survey, the surveyor must consider the suitability and have a good knowledge of it. The unit of data collection or unit of the universe must be clearly defined for inquiry before taking to the task of data collection. However, defining the units must be done based on the following criterion. First, nature, scope, and object of inquiry. This constitutes the most important factor affecting the choice of a particular method. The method selected should be such that it suits the type of inquiry that is to be conducted by the researcher. The factor is also important in deciding whether the data already available or secondary data are to be used or the data not yet available or primary data are to be collected. Availability of funds. The availability of funds for the research project determines to a large extent the method to be used for collection of data. When funds at the disposal of the researcher are very limited, he will have to select a comparatively cheaper method which may not be as efficient and effective as other costly methods. Hence, finance is a big constraint in practice and the researcher has to act within this limitation. Next is the time factor. Availability of time is also to be taken into account in deciding a particular method of data collection. Some methods take relatively more time, whereas with others the data can be collected in a comparatively shorter duration. The time at the disposal of the researcher thus affects the selection of the method by which the data are to be collected. Next, precision is required. Precision required is yet another important factor to be considered at the time of selecting the method of collection of data. Next, organization. Organization of survey is very much important from the point of getting quantitative as well as qualitative data. Several field workers may be required and training must be given to them if necessary. Arrangements regarding supervision, training workers for data collection and editing and coding must be made clear to avoid confusion. All this organization work should be pre-planned. Report. After the data has been classified and analyzed, the next step of a survey is to draft the report to whom it meant for, and the style of presentation must be of the appropriate format. In a survey, we must take the utmost care and consciousness at each phase of the activity. It is noted that social survey and social research is identical in many respects. Social phenomena is the area of the investigation used is similar. The other point which is identified in respect of social survey and social research is both are identical and are influenced by each other. Advantages and disadvantages. The survey method has the following advantages. The surveyor comes in contact with the people whom he wants to study, and with this he can observe things personally with relatives, and thereupon his inferences are not based upon any other theory or dogma till upon the fact of life. The survey method leads with greater objectivity that field workers use in the survey to help remove possible flaws and collect correct information. Survey may very well lead to the introduction of new theories. Survey method enables to fill knowledge of social institution. Now let's look at the disadvantages of the survey method. For carrying the survey, field workers are to be recruited and training is to be given to them. All this needs money. It is prolonged and time-consuming process. The reliability and validity of the data collected through the survey is not always honest. The survey conducted on a sample basis and therefore it is subjected to sampling error. Now let's look at the second method of research, the observation method. Observation is one of the oldest and fundamental research methods. The non-experimental studies of behavior systematically observed and recorded data. This is termed as observational research method. The goal of observation method is to describe a variable or a set of variables. As it is non-experimental method and nothing is manipulated or controlled, the goal is to obtain specific information about individuals, groups or settings. But this method in itself cannot provide conclusive results. The observation method is employed when the researchers are interested in the behavior rather than perception of an individual, or when the individual is unable to provide objective information. Both qualitative and quantitative research employs this method along with other tools of data collection. Let's look at characteristics of the observation method. It is goal-oriented. It must serve a formulated research purpose. It must be planned systematically. The stages and sub-stages involved should be designed and stated. It should be recorded by the observer. The observation method must simplify the process of generalization and replication. Next, let's look at the components of observation. Observation as a process consists of three important aspects. One being the sensation, next comes attention, and finally perception. Sensation stands for a sensory image. The image that our sense organs enable us to achieve. This is more or less an objective or a natural stage. The facts present are reported or noticed. Attention. It implies the investigator's ability to pursue the subject under study. The phenomenon under study is studied for a certain period to check out the validity of sensory reports. The success of the stage is largely determined by the investigator's ability to pursue the subject under study. Finally, perception. Perception is qualitatively different than the first two stages. It composes of the interpretation of the sensory report. It is discretionary stage where the facts are recognized to understand the meaning and to be appreciated scientifically. Observation is a scientific tool of data collection, therefore is not a very simple or an easy process. It is extremely demanding. To use it fruitfully, the researcher has to be thoroughly conversant with the problem under study. He has to be trained as well as experienced in the field of social research. The next is measures to ensure scientific observation. It would be an error to say that impartial observation is impossible. The effectiveness and accuracy of the observation method can certainly be increased by using additional aids. First, beside the researcher's observation records, other methods of recording also must be used. Next, use of checklists as suggested by 𝗳𝗏 and Cook can also be used. A detailed description of the events or phenomena must be made in terms of the participants. The researcher should note down the setting in which the event is being observed. Next, the purpose or the objective for which the participants are gathered together should be noted. It may not be possible to use the checklist always, but we must ensure that we collect plenty of information about the phenomenon or event to give it a correct meaning. The technique of observation is challenging because of its very nature. Hence, the selection and appointment of experienced observers increases the possibility of more accurate observation and recording of relevant data. A recent trend in social research is to have 2 or more people observe the same event. Different observers should make their records independently. When 2 or more observers are doing their job of recording the same problem, they have opportunities to compare their findings and check the bids involved. Now, what are the different types of observation? There are 2 types of observation. One is participant and non-participant, and next structured and unstructured observation. More quantitative observation is referred to as systematic or structured observation, and a more qualitative approach includes naturalistic observation, non-structured observation, and participant observation. What is non-participant observation? The observer may sometimes be present in the naturalistic observation setting, but there is no or little contact or interaction between the observer and the participant. This method is employed to primarily collect data about a social aspect of life. Non-participant observation is employed for several reasons. They are first being no access to the participant, reducing the chances of participant observation. Next, while trying to understand the social phenomenon of spontaneous nature such as unrest or protest, to observe these changes in behavior, a video recording or audio recording comes in very handy. But sometimes even the help of an insider proves to be helpful in obtaining the relevant data for research. To understand the patterns that emerge from social interactions, the observer may mask his or her identity and use the internet or online portal to understand social behavior. This overt and covert behavior that is exhibited in public and private settings respectively, the observer has a different set of ethical issues to face. One is to collect data without being intrusive and to continue to use ethical measures for procuring data. Now, let us look at the limitations of non-participant observation. Here, the researcher observes only those activities that are visible or apparent. People generally feel more suspicious of a person who stands at a distance as a supervisor than a person who intermingles with them as an associate. On the whole, a non-participant type of observation is quite popular in social science. Let's look at participant observation. Participant observation allows the researcher to collect data for a better understanding of a situation and about the people who live experiences of the situation. This is done by the researcher by being a part of the experience and by observing the events in their natural settings. Participant observation is appropriate for studying the social phenomenon that we know very little about. Participant observation allows us to understand the real world meanings and paving the way to understand the way of life of others. Document analysis, informal interview, and physical features of the same setting and direct observations of human behavior characterize the design involving participant observation. Raymond Gold describes the observer's role to be wearing along a continuum of participation ranging from complete observer to participant observer and observer as a participant to being a complete participant. The observer, to maintain his role and to be unobtrusive, writes down the observation at the end of the day on tiles and as a field notes. Participant observation has a detailed engagement with events to obtain large amounts of information that is more detailed and accurate. But one must be careful of his or her presence, as it may cause trust issues to the participants. Limitations of participant observation. Limitations are: affiliation with the group can also make the researcher biased or partial towards a particular subgroup, therefore hammering scientific accuracy. The greater the degree of participation, the observer is likely to develop a close relationship with other members of the group. The scope of the observer to study the phenomenon fully is limited. Recording the observed facts is the most difficult part of the research. Now let's get to the next method of observation, systematic or structured observation method. In this method, a set of predefined rules and procedures is established before data is collected. The purpose of the study defines the rules or procedures of data collection. It is a type of non-participant observation where there is no interaction between participant and observer. It is quantitative in nature, hence it is called systematic observation. This method uses observation schedules or checklists to record data according to the predefined set of values or criteria. This ensures consistency in data collection. It insists on factual measures than those requiring judgments or interpretations. The observations collected in rural times have a temporal dimension and provide information about duration, frequency, and sequence of events. Training and monitoring of observers and presenting of variables, including testing of the inter-observer argument, is done to ensure reliability of data. Replication and generalization is possible due to the potential to yield data with high validity. The rigorous quantitative nature allows for comparison over two sites given the same schedules and coding schemes are used. Both laboratory and natural settings are appropriate for collecting data that is not readily, for example, actions of very young people, that is not readily available. It is a combination of systematic observation along with interview schedules that allow the researcher to compare what they actually do. It is useful for understanding the processes and frequencies of behaviors within a given period. Relevant information about the setting is required to set up an observation schedule if we want to use the systematic observation method. Highly trained and skilled observers are required to undertake the systematic observation method and to execute it successfully. Now this was about the systematic observation method. Let's look at the uncontrolled observation. The uncontrolled observation is the observation being studied in a natural surrounding and activities that are performed in their usual course without any influence or guidance from any external force. This is known as uncontrolled observation. In this case, the observer visits the place of occurrence of a phenomenon to observe. He does not take part in any of the activities. Thus, it is also unstructured. It is holistic and unfocused. This allows the researcher to decide the theme of observation later on. This method records reports in a narrative style about the observations that are relevant to the research question. It is not constrained by a checklist or coding schemas, rather is accumulating knowledge with the help of the observer and the participant. It is also characterized by emergent design, as it recognizes that experience gaining can change our views on observation. Most of the social phenomena are observed and studied in this fashion. The scope of this method is certainly wider. Most of the social situations cannot be put to a thought in a laboratory type of study. Hence, some social researchers have criticized this method of uncontrolled observation. Many feel that the uncontrolled observation is very unreliable. Researchers also generalized based on stray incidents without verifying them. Various servers may observe the same thing differently and draw different conclusions. To conclude, observation is one of the important methods of data collection. Its utility cannot be undetermined due to any of the other methods of data collection. Let's look at the limitations of this observation method. As mentioned earlier, observation has to be carefully recorded by the researcher. The efficacy of this technique is limited because it cannot be used in certain events. Certain personal events do not lend themselves to the technique of observation. All researchers cannot be good observers. They must undergo a certain training to be thoroughly observant and objective while recording these events. Let's sum up. The best way to record events without interference is an observation method, and this is one of the best ways of data collection. So, we can conclude by saying that the methods of research are very important when we are trying to understand the social setting or social behavior. Let's continue in the next class.